My name is Michael Richards. I'm chairman of Lincoln City Radio. I was born in St Albans in Hertfordshire in 1947. But sadly, my mother died when I was 18 months old, and I was brought up for my first 3.5 years by my grandparents in South Wales. And I eventually went to school in North London in Muswell Hill just before I was 7 years of age, which was rather late. But I was one of the baby boomers, one of the children that was born after the Second World War, when all the soldiers and forces people came home from the war, and the population of babies exploded quite dramatically. So apart from the fact that I'd moved around areas, I'd also moved at a really bad time when a lot of young people were starting school. So I had to wait a while before I could get into school. So hence my late arrival at school in Muswell Hill. But I progressed through schools in Muswell Hill, and when I went to the William Grimshaw School, which is now called something else, can't remember what it's called now, Crichton College I think it's called, I went to school with three of the world famous Kinks, Dave Davis, Ray Davies and Peter Quaife. And I left school and went to work for the civil service in central London, and that was a career that took me for the best part of 44 years, including some highs working and looking after government ministers, writing draft speeches, organising their visits, visiting the House of Commons, and managing things like Job Centre, regional functions. And latterly I was the National Account Manager for the Job Centre Plus network, where I worked with the top 100 companies to devise recruitment strategies for them using the Job Centre network throughout the UK. In terms of my musical interests, they are really quite diverse and very broad. I have a love for jazz, which my older brother Christopher sort of got me loosely interested through a guitarist called Charlie Bird, who was originally a classical guitarist. And I got into him, and he's very strong on melody, and that encouraged me to explore other jazz artists. And whilst I'm not what do you call a jazz head, I'm not an intellectual jazz fan by any means, but I've got a pretty large collection, probably about 300 CDs, and I love everybody from the guitarist through to people like Oscar Peterson and pianists like Bill Evans, to the big bands of Buddy Rich, even the likes of Glenn Miller and people like that. So I've got a wide selection of artists I like and admire in the jazz world. But I originally grew up with pop music. I remember walking through a woodland path which backed onto a council estate that I lived on, and heard a song called, I now know is to be called A Round the Corner by Rosemary Clooney. And that tune, like tunes tend to do, stuck in my head for weeks. And that was my first real awareness that I might be interested in music. And the first record I ever bought was My Old Man's a Dustman by Lonnie Donegan, which was a big #1 in the UK in the 1950s. And I wanted to buy Champion the Wonder Horse by Frankie Lane, because Champion the Wonder Horse was a child's western programme on television. And I desperately wanted the song. I went to the record store to buy it when I'd saved up enough money, and of course they'd sold out. So I had Rawhide instead, and that was my second record. Then gradually my record collection grew in sort of with the old-fashioned 45 RPMs, like one a month or something like that sort of ilk. And I mentioned earlier on that I went to school with the Kinks. Well, Dave Davis was in my class at school, and he and another pal called George Harris were very, very keen on American music. And they introduced me to Duane Eddy and Chet Atkins and Johnny and the Hurricanes and Bobby Darin and people of that ilk. And so my interest in popular music took a foothold, and really from there my musical taste started to develop. As mentioned, my older brother got me interested in jazz. My stepmother got me interested in classical music through Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, and I've become a great Rachmaninoff fan as a result of that. And I now like quite a range of what I would call popular classics, the likes of Tchaikovsky and Strauss and people like Delius and Sibelius, people of that sort of well-known classical composers. And again, I've got quite a substantial classical music collection as well. But where does it end? I mean, my big love is Duane Eddy, who's become a friend for the last 43 years. Duane Eddy had sold over 100 million records by today. I think that's the number of his total sales. And he's had, I think in the States, there were like about 41 top 100 hits. In the UK, he's had about 24. And I got to meet Duane Eddy through revitalising his fan club in 1975. So I've always loved guitar music. I've loved the Shadows, Sandy Nelson, Jet Harris, all those sorts of people. So that was my big first love. It's developing out of the pop music genre, really. It was just like another offshoot. And there's still some business for those sort of artists today. Duane, in fact, has just finished a sellout tour of the UK last month. Other music I like country western music. I've got a penchant for soul music. I've always been a great soul fan. In fact, I like just about any sort of music. I'm never very keen on rap, never very keen on punk music, although there's one or two bands that I quite like from the punk era, but not very many. So I've got what they would call a very Catholic taste of music, and I suppose that sits me well in terms of being a radio presenter. So having that vast collection of music, I've probably got something like around about 6,000 CDs in the library, and what that's done really is give me not only a good selection of music to play. I also know quite a lot about the different artists. So when it comes to playing music at Lincoln City Radio, if we ever need any information about the artists, it's not just the actual name of the artist I know. I will generally know, for most people, I would know a bit about the artist, their history, and maybe their recording career as well. I wouldn't have to refer to a book for that. We haven't got too many people on the station that can actually do that. My history in broadcasting stems back to the 1960s, when I used to work on a discotheque called Yellow Brick Road in the Watford, Hertfordshire area. And I used to do things like weddings and 21st birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and that sort of thing. And it was generally at weekends, Friday nights and Saturday nights. And one of my old bosses, a chap called Len Vickery, saw an advert or an article in the Watford Observer, a weekly newspaper, that was looking for radio presenters to work on WHBS, which was Watford Hospital Broadcasting Service, and said to me, why don't you diversify? Why don't you go and do a radio programme as well? And I thought, crikey, it's a bit of a difference from spinning records to keep people dancing to actually talking to them on air on a one-to-one basis. I don't know that I could do that. But he persuaded me to go along, and I had an interview with a chap called Roy Evans, and this would be about 1967, 68, I would think. And they agreed to give me a test, and I had a test there, and it went quite well. So they asked me to go on their training program, which I did, and it started quite a long career of freelance broadcasting. I worked on WHBS, Watford Hospital Broadcasting Service, for something like about 4 years, and then I moved to Runcorn in Cheshire, and so I left broadcasting behind me, and I had worked up in Runcorn near Liverpool for some time, and then I moved to Northamptonshire. And when I went to Northamptonshire, I got a job with Radio Nene Valley, and I worked for them for something like about 6 or 7 years. And I had a great time there, and a lot of us got freelance work at BBC, but then work intervened, and as it did in those days, and I got promoted, and I moved to Nottingham, where I had quite a responsible job and worked very long hours, just when I was working for government ministers. And I left broadcasting behind for quite a long time. I was just thinking it must be something like about 15 years. Then I moved across to Lincoln to manage Lincoln Job Centre, and I was quite a regular on BBC Lincolnshire in terms of talking about the economy and other matters relating to employment and unemployment in Lincoln. And on one such occasion, I was then approached by a chap called Mike Strawson, who was involved with Lyndon Radio, to say he just heard me on BBC Lincolnshire, and would I go on to Lyndon Radio and to talk about the introduction of a new government policy, which was then called the New Deal, which I said I'd be happy to do. And I actually delivered my responsibility and gave my press call to Lyndon Radio. And afterwards, the guy that ran the station at the time, a chap called Ray Drury, wanted to have a chat to me, and I mentioned in a conversation that I'd been involved in broadcasting on and off across the years. and he said, would I like to join Lyndon Radio? And I said, well, you can put me down. I don't know how available I'm always going to be, because I work some strange hours at times. And to cut long story short, the next time they had a broadcast, they used to have these RSLs, which is known as Restricted Service Licence. And he called me up one summer afternoon and said, would I like to come in the studio the following week? They were broadcasting from a temporary studio in Burton Road, Lincoln, at the old barracks. And he'd like me to do a programme 3 days a week for 2 weeks on this particular programme, which I duly delivered for him. Thank you for watching the film. I'm back on the air Monday mornings, Tuesday mornings, as part of the Lincoln Morning Team with Tony Wilkins and Malcolm Thompson. And I look forward to you tuning into us either on 103.6 FM in the Lincoln area, or online anywhere in the world at www.lincolncityradio.com. Thanks for watching.